Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Monday, December 3rd, 2018. We're here for the purpose of the regular meeting of the Elmhurst City Council. It's 7:39. I ask that you all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ask Clerk Cyprian to call a roll.
Levin.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Conquest.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Brennan.
Here.
Sabatino.
Here.
Deuter.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Palumski.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Toledo.
Here.
York.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. We have a quorum. Things a little different tonight. We've got a couple of public hearings within our council meeting. So on to agenda item 3.1, 2019 budget public hearing. There is a public hearing scheduled for this evening. The public hearing concerns the city's proposed 2019 budget. I call the public hearing regarding the 2019 budget to order. Roll call, Clerk Cyprian.
Levin.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Conquest.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Brennan.
Here.
Sabatino.
Here.
Deuter. Here. Dunn.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Palumski.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Toledo.
Here.
York.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. The purpose of this public hearing is to take public comment concerning the city's proposed 2019 budget. I would ask that Clerk Cyprian read any written comments concerning this matter into the record.
I have no written comments, Mayor.
Okay, did we put a sign-up sheet out for this?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so at this time, I would invite members of the public, wait for Clerk Cyprian to call your name to make any comments. Once you are recognized, I ask that you state your name for the record and make your way to the microphone over to my right, just behind Chief Ruth over there. Clerk Cyprian, anybody sign up for public?
Yes, Mayor. Daniel Marians. Sorry.
Good evening. Forgive the impromptu
You can
nature.
raise up your microphone so we can hear you.
I forgive the impromptu nature of my delivery here. Sorry about it in advance. My concern with reviewing the budget, please, if I may, as a resident, I was simply looking through and wondering what, if any, green energy or clean energy allocations have been made for the coming year, as I didn't see many possibilities empty in the ability to charge cars or provide that service in the town, as there are only 2 charging locations in Elmhurst. Is that something to even be brought up at such a meeting?
Absolutely. Bring up whatever you want, but this isn't a Q&A, this is public comment. So state whatever you want to state, and then certainly maybe someone from staff will follow up with you afterwards.
I would love to see opportunities for the town to really drive clean energy initiatives forward a little bit and allow for the influx of potential revenue with electric car chargers on site at some of the public structures, perhaps even to be subsidized at a lesser charge to facilitate some clean energy and initiatives as such coming into town. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments?
No one else signed up.
Okay. Anybody who didn't have an opportunity to sign in on our sign-in sheet, wish to make a comment regarding our budget? Please raise your hand so you can be recognized. I see one. Mr. Pagash? This? Yeah. I don't want to make anything.
Claude Bogart, 566 West Gladys. Well, I guess the vote for the budget is going to take place. I guess it was all necessary, all the increases. Unfortunately, there are legislative bodies in this town. School board got their general obligation bonds voted in, and I'm sure the Park District has their budget that they're going to raise. I'm sure the school will have a budget that costs a little more. And then we do have the county to worry about. And then the state legislators, they got a state to run. On top of it, federal government's changed the income tax code. But that's going to have an effect. And the city council, over a period of time, has been more than generous in setting up TIFs and giving away tax dollars to corporations. That go on and on. So this whole idea that legislative bodies can just raise, sell general obligation bonds. Unfortunately, the residents that are sitting here, will their incomes match your wishes? Like I said, federal government's changed tax laws, so that's going to affect the homeowner. And that setting up TIFs is taking a great hunk of money out of the city's income, plus the giving away of taxes. So you'll vote it in, you and the rest of the people in this room. We'll get a little piece of paper from the assessor. Then we'll see if it's all worthwhile. You do have projects that are worthwhile. It's unfortunate that government believes that everything costs more. Unfortunately for the people that you govern, what it costs them to live goes up. If their income doesn't match your wishes, they're caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? This town has a tendency, in my own viewpoint, forget about the resident. If he wants something, he'll pay for it. Commercial property wants something, all they got to do is come to this council. And it's endless. So you can vote on it, then you go out there and you tell the people you represent, that resident, just had to be. If you haven't got it, you haven't got it, but you're still going to have to pay it. So just keep on getting the people locked up. They don't have TIFs. And as I remember one alderman once said, of what value would it be to give a homeowner a TIF? Take care of them commercial guys. Have a good meeting with the business community, Mayor.
Okay. That's it for those who signed up and those who raised their hand. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Alderman York, second by Alderman Brennan. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Budget hearing is adjourned. On to agenda item 3.2. This is a public hearing for the proposed property tax levy increase for the Special Service Area Number 6. There's a public hearing scheduled for this evening. The public hearing concerns the city's proposed property tax levy increase for Special Service Area Number 6. I call the public hearing to order. Roll call, please. Clerk Cyprian.
Levin?
Here.
Park?
Here.
Conquest?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Mulliner? Here. Brennan?
Here.
Sabatino?
Here.
Deuter?
Here.
Dunn?
Here.
Leader?
Here.
Blumsky? Here. Graham?
Here.
Paludo? Here. York?
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. The purpose of this public hearing is to take public comment concerning the city's proposed, did I already say this? City's proposed property tax levy increase for Special Service Area Number 6, also known as the Elmhurst City Center. I haven't read that yet. Clerk Cyprian, I ask that you read any written comments concerning this matter into the record.
We have no written
No written
comments.
comments. Did anybody sign up for public comment?
No one signed up.
At this time, is there anybody who wishes to comment regarding the tax levy for SSA Number 6 that did not have an opportunity to sign in our sign-in sheet, but wishes to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to conclude this hearing. Motion to adjourn this hearing. Motion by Alderman York, second by Alderman Honquist. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This hearing is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. On to agenda item 4, receipt of written communication from the public. At this time, is there anybody in the audience who has any written communication they wish to submit? If so, please raise your hand if you have any written communication you wish to submit. Seeing none, we'll go on to public forum, agenda item 5. This is an opportunity for anybody in the audience to address the council on any issue they so choose. Specifically, we ask that you direct your comments to the chairman. When your name is called, I ask that you make your way to the microphone that has previously been used. Out of respect for work that we need to get done here this evening and respect for other folks who may want to speak. Okay there, Alderman Levin?
Pretty good, thank you.
Okay. Out of respect for other folks who may want to speak, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. If you go over 3 minutes, I'll give you a gentle reminder and ask you to wrap up your comments. Clerk Cyprian, at this time, has anybody signed up for public forum?
Yes, Mayor Moore, we have one. Claude Pagash.
Please state your name for the record when you get to the microphone. As we are recording, address is optional.
Lord Package, 566 West Gladys. I only have one question. Council voted in a bond issue to install water meters. $8 million. On the agenda tonight, something radically happened. Just burned through $8 million. Got to renegotiate. Renegotiate what? You got a contract with them. It's like building a house and saying, well, we can't put the roof on because we ran out of money. So I'm assured my representatives can explain why all of a sudden you got to change your contract. $8 million is a lot of money. You signed it, or your representatives did. So why don't you take a little time just to explain it to the audience why it's going to cost them more for water meters.
Direct your comments to me, Mr. Pagash.
You are the mayor, Mayor, but I have 2 representatives on this council. They represent my ward, and they have to have an opinion. You may be mayor, sir, but they were voted in by the people of my ward. And if they haven't got any comment on it, then why not?
Okay, anyone else, Clerk Cyprian, for sign-in?
No one else signed in, Mayor.
At this time, is there anyone in the audience who did not have an opportunity to sign in but wishes to address the council at this time? Please raise your hand. Anyone who wishes to address the council? Kira? No? Okay. We'll go on to announcements. Agenda item 6. Any announcements from the dais? Okay, on to consent agenda. At this time, is there any item on the consent agenda any alderman wishes to pull to provide additional comment or vote no? Seeing none, I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety. Motion by Alderman Paludo, second by Alderman Mulliner. Do I do voice vote on that? No. Clerk Cyprian.
Levin. Park.
Aye.
Conquest.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Brennan.
Aye.
Sabatino.
Aye.
Deuter.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Lumsky.
Aye. Aye.
Oh, sorry. Graham.
Aye.
Toledo. Aye. York.
Aye.
14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays, motion carries. Consent agenda in its entirety is approved. On to committee reports. 8.1, this is a report out of Finance. I would ask Clerk Cyprian to read the recommendation.
It is therefore the recommendation of the Finance, Council Affairs, and Administrative Services Committee that the City Council approve the City of Elmhurst 2018 tax levy in the amount of $10,185,146, representing no increase in the city's tax levy compared to 2017. Furthermore, it is the recommendation of the FCAAS Committee that the City Council approve the abatement of all current tax debt service obligations for the city's general obligation bonds, including the recently approved 2018 GO bonds in the amount of $8,927,815.15. The FCAAS Committee also recommends that the City Council direct the City Attorney to prepare the 2018 tax levy ordinance and appropriate debt service abatement ordinances. Signed, Kevin York, Chairman, Mark P. Sabatino, Vice Chairman, Tina Park, Mike Brennan.
Okay, to put this before council, I'll ask for a motion to approve the report and recommendation as read. Motion by Alderman York, second by Alderman Sabatino. Alderman York, your report.
It's our report. Thank you, Your Honor. As always, I'd like to open by thanking city staff for all their thoughtful work in the preparation of the budget document, which leads to the tax levy recommendation we have before us tonight. I'd also like to compliment our committee for the time spent in having some engaging conversations on the budget. I believe we've come to rest in a great place with our recommendation, and I have a few prepared comments, as I usually do this time of year. As is the custom in our committee, when we reach a point where a decision is to be made, as chair, I always yield to my fellow committee members for their thoughts before I share mine. I believe this is the best approach for our committee. As it turns out, on this topic, Alderman Brennan and I were pretty much on the exact same track with many of the same talking points. Vice Chair Sabatino and Alderman Park both offered valuable insights as well. But at the end of the meeting, we were able to become aligned and in agreement with the recommendation and the report that you have before you tonight. Finance Director Troisine, on the other hand, well, he will always like more revenue. That's his job. It's really simple when it's all boiled down. The city continues to maintain a general balance fund that is in excess of the council's general fund policy, fund balance policy. This is the result of several things. The most relevant to the conversation tonight, however, is tax increases that have been approved in the past and have positively accrued to the general fund balance. When it's all said and done, none of us on the committee felt that we could justify raising a tax levy when the city was in this outstanding cash position. It felt too much like taxing to save to all of us. So what's changed from last year when we were pretty much in the same situation? Nothing really, except that we've been trying to, as I said last year, land this plane, with the plane being the general fund balance, on the runway, with the runway being the council's general fund balance policy range for a few years, and we still have not landed. The 2018 tax levy recommendation is flat for the city portion of the tax of the levy, and an increase of 1.3% when factoring in the library. As a reminder to everyone on the dais and all the folks at home, there are 3 lines out of about 20 line items on everybody's tax bill for the city. And they are 1, the City of Elmhurst, 2, pension fund, and 3, the City of Elmhurst LIBR, which is the library. The city line item will decrease for the average home. The pension fund line item will increase for the average home. The 2 will net each other out, and the library line item will increase $12.62 for the average home in Elmhurst. As the report indicates, the average home has also increased in value by about 4.68% for 2018, which is always good news. Also good news is the committee is recommending continuing abatement of the debt service for general obligation bonds, totaling about $8.93 million for the 2018 levy. Now, not to get too far out there, but due to new growth in the EAV, which the city has experienced, and all other assumptions about an individual property remaining the same, a flat or a 0 increase tax levy could lead to a slight decrease in an individual's tax bill. It could be summed up as the same tax levy dollars spread out over a bigger base, which would result in a smaller apportionment to those properties that were on the tax rolls previously. There's a lot of information, numbers, and statistics in the committee report and related schedules. You guys are all smart people and have been around this block before. Bottom line, as the mayor alluded to in our very first committee of the whole meeting on the budget we had several weeks ago, it's our job to provide the path for the city staff to land this plane on the runway. That path is clearly and concisely as possible put into words in the second bullet point of the 3 deliberation factors on page 1 of our committee report, and it very clearly guided us in our recommendation to not increase the tax levy this year. So for about the 4th year in a row, I'll once again appeal to you all that we will need to continue to work together to pay close attention to the general fund balance and the underlying economic conditions that were used in the formulation of the budget to make sure that we maintain the general fund balance in a responsible manner so as not to cause stress on those resources. With the budget that we hope to get through later tonight and the tax levy recommendation, we have a general fund balance that should be squarely within the prescribed general fund balance range by the end of 2019. But as is indicated, we'll have significant work ahead in future periods to make sure it stays there. I know that many of you, including city staff, have expressed concern regarding the revenue sources for future stormwater projects, in particular, and how that will affect budgets, tax levies, and fund balances moving forward. As a suggestion to potentially ease those concerns, a situation like this could be alleviated by bonding for these projects, as we always do, which, as I have expressed consistently since I've been on the council, is the most equitable way to pay for these long-term investments. We could then choose, as a council collectively, to not abate the bonds, that particular bond's debt service, having those costs spread evenly across the EAV of the city in each period. Just some food for thought, certainly a definitive way of financing for a specific project that has equal benefit to the entire city. Finally, I bet everybody's happy to hear that word, huh? Finally. I would also like to add that as a result of the change back in 2013 to a calendar year, we now talk about the budget and the tax levy concurrently, which is great and so very appropriate. However, in a perfect world, it would be ideal to have the budget wrapped up prior to a tax levy recommendation. In the event of a budget cut later tonight at our committee of the whole meeting, we could find ourselves in a position where we are approving more tax levy dollars than may be required to fund a budget that now has fewer budgeted expenses. So with that tidbit, I'll thank everybody for their time and interest in our committee's work, ask for your support of this report, let you know that our committee is happy to do our best to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question or comments regarding the report or for the committee? Alderman Levin.
Thank you, Mayor. A comment and then a question for the chair, if I may. The comment is, I'm pleased that the Finance Committee has done, as it always has done in years past, an excellent job in evaluating the needs for our budget and our taxes. I think it's important to point out, as Chairman York just did, not only is it a 0% flat tax for the city's decision on what can be levied, but it must be noted that the pension fund contributions, which we are required to make, are not determined by us. They're imposed upon us by the state legislature. So those aren't any taxes that we are coming around and asking to have. They are dictated to us. And the library, although it is a part of the city, their trustees set their own target and decide what tax increase is needed for the library. So for 4 years in a row, we have not raised that portion of our city's, the portion that we control, and I commend the committee on that. Then my question, and maybe I should know, but I don't, so I'll just ask. On the fire protection decrease of $496,000 plus, how is that, can you tell me how that came to be, or?
Chairman York.
Thank you. So there's 4 components that we use in the tax levy, and the fire portion is what we call, us accountants have a word for that, it's called a plug number. So we kind of know what the total amount is going to be, and then we subtract from it the ambulance contract, because that's a known amount, and then 80% of the pensions and FICA. And then whatever the difference is between what we want to levy and those three things ends up being that fire protection number. And we always have more expenses in fire protection than what that number represents. And much like when we issue a bond or we do our tax levy, we have to spend the money how we say we're going to spend it. So we will spend the tax levy on those items, but we will also obviously spend more beyond that in other areas.
That's just what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And in case, what you're talking about is we have other revenues from other tax sources besides property tax that we would use for these other expenses. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Alderman Toledo.
Thank you. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to the Finance Committee. Having served on the committee in the past, I know that this is it's a very important part of the work you do, and it takes a lot of time. So thank you very much for your well-thought-out report, thinking here. I agree with your thinking as laid out in the report, and I support it and appreciate, as I'm sure many of the residents do, not having a tax increase this year for the city portion of the tax levy. So thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain, I'll ask Clerk Cyprian to call a vote.
Levin?
Aye.
Park?
Aye.
Conquest?
Aye.
Kennedy? Aye. Mulliner?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Sabatino?
Aye.
Deuter?
Aye.
Leader?
Aye.
Palumski?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Toledo?
Aye.
York?
Aye.
14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays, motion carries. Before we go on to 8.2, I do want to comment a little bit on the report and taxes in Elmhurst. Alderman York mentioned one thing about our financial calendar. It used to end at the end of April. And I can't remember who, but a couple of aldermen at the time thought that wasn't a great idea. They should go with the calendar year. Remember who that was?
Smart and good-looking guys.
All right, anyway.
I didn't do that one.
But Alderman York mentioned that that they're in the middle of their committee was in the middle of evaluating what the tax levy should be, and it's kind of they get as close as they can with the information that they have, and we have a budget that's probably 95% done at this point. My point is that we used to have to really guess in April, and our budget was finalized in December. So in making that move, not only do we save some dollars internally, but it does allow us to hit that, have more information so that we can make better decisions as it relates to our tax levy. Second thing is, it's mentioned in the report, and Alderman York mentioned it, we're abating our bond payments. We actually have to legislatively abate our bond payments. Basically what that means is, and I've mentioned this in the past, that we're AAA rated organization, and we can issue GO bonds, and part of the reason why we're in such good shape is that we're home rule, and at any given time, we could turn around and tax 16,000 homes approximately. But the flip side is, I think it's important to understand, is that our balance sheet is so healthy that the bonds that we currently have outstanding, we're not asking our residents to contribute to the payment of that debt service. We actually abate that or take the payment on ourselves. Third comment is, and it was talked about a little bit, is that the library is its own self-sustaining board when it comes to their recommendations on the tax levy. They make a recommendation, and then we're required by Illinois law to approve their recommendation. But I will say this, the library has some bonds that are expiring, I think, in 4 years, 3 years, 3 years. So you're going to see a change, I think, in a couple of years from now. And the last thing is, we have this fund balance range that's also talked about. And it's a real, so that we don't put too much burden on future residents and we don't put too much burden on current residents, we really try to hit this mark. And it's detailed very well in the budget that staff is currently presenting to us. But the fact that we have some growth and we've had basically flat tax or no increases over the past 4 years tells me that staff and elected officials are doing a pretty good job hitting that target. So I want to commend everybody involved, all elected officials, certainly in city staff, in achieving that and still delivering great services to our residents. On to agenda item 8.2. This is a report out of DP&Z. Clerk Cyprian, I'd ask that you read the recommendation.
Therefore, the Development Planning and Zoning Committee recommend that the City Council approve the sub-area plans and amend the official comprehensive plan for the City of Elmhurst, the amendment known as the sub-area plans. The city attorney is hereby directed to prepare the necessary documents for City Council approval. Signed, Michael Honquist, Chairman, Noel Toludo, Vice Chairman, Mark A. Mulliner.
Okay, to put this before council, I'll ask for a motion to approve the report and recommendation as read. Motion by Alderman Honquist, second by Alderman Toludo. Alderman Honquist, your report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As my colleagues are well aware, we have a planning process, which is best practice of any organization and of the city. And the last time we did a comprehensive plan for the city was in 2009. When we did that plan, there were sub-areas that were identified, 9 in particular, and we started a process last year to identify 5 particular areas that we spent time with the commission, the Development Planning Commission, and this committee to help identify those 5 priorities amongst others within the city as our top 5. And through that process, brought in a consultant we use, Housel Levine, to help us with the planning process. So, as I mentioned, that started last year, 2017, and it went through public hearings and input from the community, and was ultimately driven to back to our committee in the past month, where we reviewed these 5 areas and the plans that the consultant and the community put together. And tonight, we're going to review that in a few moments. And I just wanted to let everyone, particularly my colleagues on the dais here, know that of the 5 plans, we did have one area, and that's the Yorkfield area, that we did get some feedback from the community. They were not particularly happy with the plan as it came out of the commission. So the committee and staff, I think, did an excellent job working with the community to address some of their concerns and iron out those issues. And with our last meeting, we had consensus to move forward with those adjustments. So we have before you tonight the 5 area plans, and I will make a motion to, if we can, Mr. Mayor, to suspend the rules so that we can have Mr. Nick Davis from Housel Levine do a short presentation to the council, which will basically summarize these 5 areas, and then I'll leave it up to you on questions. Thank you.
Actually, it's motion just for consent to allow somebody. We're not suspending our rules, we're following our rules.
Oh, thank you.
So a motion to allow Mr. Nick Davis to address council or entertain questions from council. Motion by Alderman Honquist, second by Alderman Toludo. We'll do this by voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Mr. Davis, the floor is yours.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yep. All right. Well, thank you for giving us an opportunity. Like Alderman Honquist said, keep it brief. If there's any questions, we can answer those towards the end here. Just going to go over and give you a general update of what we were talking about as we've gone through these 5 different sub areas and what some of the key recommendations are, what some of the key policies are. One of the first ones, or one of the first steps of this was we did go through a process to establish which sub-areas needed to be updated that are in the 2009 plan. The 5 that we came to were along Lake Street, North and 83, York and Villette, a new sub-area that wasn't in the 2009 plan, but one that we thought, based on recommendations from the recent downtown plan, really warranted a deeper study, a deeper dive into. So that's the York and First Street, and the last sub-area was the Yorkfield area. So as I go through this, maybe if you have questions, we'll kind of tally them up, and we'll talk about those at the end. So this kind of gives you a general sense, if you do have the document in front of you, it gives you a general sense where the 5 sub-areas are, where they're located in the city. The first area that I wanted to talk about was the Lake Street area. So each plan has kind of a rhythm to them. You can see each one has a framework plan, establishes some of the high-level policies and recommendations for those areas. Some of the key themes, I would say, in the Lake Street area are both mobility for vehicles and truck traffic, as well as pedestrian mobility in this area. Some of what we heard throughout this process is that there's a lack of connectivity, both east and west as you move along the corridor, but also how you're crossing. So those types of improvements would also include pedestrian enhancements, key intersection enhancements, both for those pedestrians who potentially want to walk along the corridor to the businesses or the industrial parks to the north, but also connecting to the residential districts and the park to the south. We also identified the types of uses in the future if these areas were to redevelop are ideal for these locations. That's based on the lot depths, lot sizes, and we also looked at some of the potential bicycle connections that would tie into the bicycle plan that the city currently has. As we dive into each one of these areas, there's some highlighted themes. Some of the major ones we talked about were parking and how those are going to be accessed and what those would look like over time, some of the improvements that could be made. We talk about the frontage road. There's a detail a few pages in that we'll go over briefly. We also talk about, as I mentioned, the sidewalks and then some gateway features. Because of the scale of some of the gateways that are there now, there's a real opportunity to kind of build those up, make them a little bit more substantial when you consider the speeds of the cars that are moving through this area. So it's just those types of recommendations to keep in mind as this area starts to improve or enhance over time. One of the things that we talked about was the overall cross-section of the road. Some of the lane widths here are pretty wide. So we just show an option of if you're to reduce those lane widths, you would slow down traffic slightly, enough where you're making a little bit of space for people to make a right-hand turn into some of the businesses in a safer manner. That also has ramifications for those pedestrians that walk through this space. So if cars are able to make a safer turn in, there's less conflicts for pedestrians that may potentially be along this corridor. So we provide some graphics of what that would look like. We show what some of these sites that may not redevelop anytime soon, what some of those on-site improvements might look like. So be it landscaping, facade improvements, site access, how you're moving through, so consolidating some of the excess curb cuts that might exist here or decreasing the width of them. Some of them are excessive in width as well. And then just showing what landscaping would look like if you were to reconfigure some of the systems as you move through in terms of like vehicular or parking patterns, just to generally improve the look and aesthetic. The frontage road is an area that we talked about sort of at length with a couple of the different outreach efforts that we'd had, also working with the city, and just trying to get a sense for what are some of the opportunities that are out there. One opportunity would be to provide, instead of, you could remove the current frontage road, bring properties and buildings up closer to Lake Street, allow direct access in. That would really open up this area to the types of developments that right now aren't feasible, aren't really possible, aren't being considered because you don't have that direct access. The second one would be if you were to just take some of the space that's there now, where it's that concrete, I'll call it like a concrete grade separated curb cut or a curb, and if you're able to plant that with vegetation, with trees and shrubs and that type of thing, just aesthetically you can make that area look a little bit better than it does now. So that was Lake Street. North Avenue and 83. Some of the things that we talked about along North Avenue and 83, we really focused on the northwest corner and the southeast corner. So a lot of our recommendations are targeted to these areas. Again, this is that framework plan, kind of giving you an idea of overall the types of recommendations and policies you'd like to see happen here in the future. I guess starting with the intersection itself, there are opportunities to enhance it, make it safer for vehicular access points, decrease some of the curb cuts that are so close to the intersection that do create conflicts. There's also an opportunity, certain areas here where they would benefit from pedestrians being able to cross in a more safe manner. If you've ever tried to ride your bike through this area, but more likely if you've ever tried to walk across the intersection, there's not really any kind of holding zones or what we call is like a refuge island, but there's an opportunity for them. So whatever you can do to make it feel a little bit safer for pedestrians to go east-west, that's really the goal of what we're showing in this improvement. One of the sites that we talked about on that northwest side, I'll show you the graphic, just shows you, so right there, you could get something fairly substantial. So this graphic's really meant to show the scale of this site, how large it is. There's an opportunity for a rec center or something of that scale that could go right there at the corner, something that's high visibility, easy to access into, something that, with the traffic counts that you're seeing along North Avenue and particularly along 83, something that, could really take advantage of that proximity to that much traffic coming by. To the north, so this graphic's actually looking south. To the north, you have commercial development that could come between the hotel that exists there now, sort of still east of the Salt Creek, and then north of what would be that rec facility. Could be kind of a mixed-use center, so you'd have commercial or restaurant at the right there in front of 83, and then as you transition back, there might be commercial services, maybe offices or flex spaces on the second floor. Something that would take advantage of the space, again, of the traffic patterns that are coming through here, and then ultimately like an internalized parking setup for both the rec center and the mixed-use district. On the southeast corner, we looked at two different options. The first option would be if you were to consolidate some of these parcels, knowing that current improvements have been made. But this is in the future. If property owners that are there now think there's an opportunity to make an additional improvement or a substantial improvement, you could consolidate these blocks that are fronting along North Avenue and fronting along 83 and create a more of like a retail center as opposed to a series of standalone buildings. You could also decrease the amount of access points that are currently happening on both those roads. And by consolidating those, you're able to get more parking, you're able to get more retail or service uses. You also have an opportunity if you wanted to head down. It would basically be about one lot width coming further south, and you could move the cul-de-sacs down. One would be proposed along Glade, but the other one would just have to shift down about 25, 30 feet. And again, that would open up development along North Avenue. Also allows the Delta Sonic now to move their site a little bit further down. They currently own some of those parcels. So that's a real opportunity. Gets it a little further away from North Avenue, which it is very close to. The second option is just showing that with the current parcel makeup and the current ownership makeup, what would redevelopment look like there? You could still have new investment, new development along 83. There might be some consolidation of the curb cut points that are along North Avenue, but you'd really see most of the improvement or investment along Route 83. And then what we did say is, although we didn't look at the areas that are the northeast corner and the southwest corner, I think as improvements start to occur, you're going to want to re-examine these areas. Certainly the northeast corner as it stands now has a fairly recent development, but based on what happens in here in the future, you could see that potentially redeveloping over time. First Street and York Street. So we're really looking at this concentrated block, traditionally what's been called the donut hole area, and we're just trying to visualize what could happen in this area in the future. Based on the current zoning code as it stands, by right, what could someone do if they were to consolidate some of these parcels? One of the things, and it might be tough to see on this graphic, but because of the ownership makeup here, only 3 owners own the frontage if it's along Addison, First, or York, which is fairly significant. If 2 owners or 3 owners can get together and either sell their parcels, or if they want to do a joint venture and redevelop, you could redevelop an entire frontage. So that's what we were trying to show here, is what could happen over time, what would that look like, knowing that everything that we're going to show kind of moving forward is by right. So this is things that you could do on these parcels now. The first concept that we looked at, we broke these up into these three options. The first option would be if you were to do facade improvements. So there's buildings along there's buildings along First and Addison that could benefit from facade improvements. So that could be one way to enhance this area, give it a different look, a different feel. Another option that we explored was what would happen if First Street was to redevelop. So if those 3 property owners got together and did a redevelopment, followed the code by right, you could get up to 8 stories, 10 stories along Addison and First Street, and then we show right there at the corner of First and York. Obviously, a real opportunity. It's one of the key corners in the downtown. Currently there's a 1-story building. This is what that could look like if you were to kind of maximize those redevelopment opportunities. Parking would be internalized. It'd be away from the street. Access points would be served by alleys. probably improved alleys. And then we're trying to build off of some of the improvements that are currently underway with the metro station and some of the improvements that are already happening in the area. And then the third option is if you were to have a total rebuild of this area. And you have to think about these in phases. It's very difficult to imagine this happening all in one development, and it's very unlikely. But if it were to happen, you could see these phases, and these phases would probably break out maybe along First Street first. You might see the north side of Addison, then redevelop, and the potential over time portions of York Street could redevelop. And again, everything that we're showing here is something that could be done by right. And I think that was important. We wanted to make sure that it was realistic. It was something that you wouldn't have to go through a lot of steps or procedures to see through. York and Villette, similar exercise to what we were looking at in the downtown area, just trying to get a sense for, I think a lot of the feedback that we received is how does this area start to serve as its own mixed-use district, maybe looking for a little bit more height right there on the south side of York and on the south side of Villette and to the west of York. And what we show in some of these concepts are, establishing or formalizing the farmers market, the types of uses and scale that are appropriate, consolidating some of the parking. That's one of the real challenges in this area is how parking is facilitated. How do you tie into the Illinois Prairie Path in a more substantial way? Those were many of the things that we heard as we did our outreach. You can see here we show, similar to the graphic on Lake Street, is in some cases this area may not redevelop. And if it doesn't redevelop, what could improvements or enhancements look like? So we show vegetation and landscaping. We show how you might repurpose some of the parking to make it a little easier to navigate, but also get some of the amenities that people like. Again, as vegetation, sidewalks, connecting points. We also show what one of the plans are for the Illinois Prairie Path, how that connection is going to occur, what those safety measures look like. This is a really challenging intersection right now for both pedestrians and cyclists with vehicles, so you get a sense for what that could look like and how that would act as a more safe connection point east-west for the path. We show, and this is kind of a two-page graphic, we show what York and Villette, if these property owners could get together and redevelop this as a consolidated effort, bringing the commercial, bringing the multifamily closer to York and Villette and internalizing that parking lot, you get a sense for, what the scale of this space could be. Again, this is stuff that could be done there by right. And you get an idea of if you were to basically flip the model as it is now, don't have parking along York, don't have it along Villette, and put the parking in the back, do a better job, designing this as a whole as opposed to hodgepodge for each one. You'd get a more efficient and more realistic parking scenario and one that you'd actually get more spaces for. The last area that we looked at was the York Street and Butterfield Road. And as Alderman Honquist had alluded to when we started this, definitely one that over the last couple months we've spent a lot of time working with the community, working with the city to kind of fine tune what these recommendations needed to be so they were more in line with what the residents in this area were expecting. So we're working from the west to the east. We show what one of the connection points would be. The connection point would be along Salt Creek for the trail. We identify some enhancements that could do for the intersection improvements, pedestrian improvements. We show a concept for how the roadway could be reconfigured along Butterfield to accommodate the lanes that are appropriate for this area, also to alleviate some of the traffic concerns or comments that we'd heard throughout the process. And then as we get further toward or closer to the intersection of York and Butterfield, some of the mix of uses that might be more appropriate along York and Butterfield, specifically those that are fronting along York, and then also what some of the residential properties that are between these commercial districts, multifamily areas, and the hospital, might look like over time if they were to redevelop. So the first area that we talk about, the sub-area enhancements, include the sidewalk network, just in general trying to make more connections where it's appropriate. There's the redevelopment. If these areas are to redevelop, there are processes that need to be followed to make sure that they're consistent as they redevelop over time. We also talk about some of the, these are somewhat harder to see, the multi-use path, what that would look like, where those connection points need to be so it can become a contiguous multi-use path through the area. We talk about the York Street and Butterfield Road, as I talked about. Right now, you have an inconsistent lane patterns there. So sometimes there's 2 or 3 lanes, sometimes there's just 2. So to make that more consistent, so you can get the traveling through there a little bit more efficiently and less traffic congestion points. We also talk about site access to some of these properties. There's some odd right-in, right-outs only. So what configurations could be made to make that easier? And then the last area that we talked about was, with these residential districts, what annexation would potentially look like, what redevelopment in this area could look like. We also talked about integration with the hospital, kind of knowing what they're hoping to do in the future, what some of their plans are, what we think some appropriate uses might be in those locations. We talked about traffic management over time. If redevelopment is to occur, how traffic management would have to be assessed for any redevelopment that was going to occur in this area to be consistent with, the current demands, also the future demands. And then York Street in general, just what redevelopment along York Street could look like if those property owners chose to redevelop. So I think with that, if there's any questions or comments for the plan, we can answer.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Any questions? While we have him here on the hot seat.
Mhm.
Alderman Palomsky.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and the report, and to the committee, and all staff working on it. I have a question about input about traffic. I know that when you referenced the Prairie Path crossing, you did note the study, the feasibility study conducted by Trans Systems in August of 2017. I'm curious about the area at 83 and North, where one of the options is to close off the cul-de-sac, or to create a cul-de-sac at Glade. I'm curious to know if there are any discussions with engineering about that. Just because that happens also to be a topic that has been in our committee, just like the Prairie Path is, so I'm curious to know if you had any discussion about that.
Yeah, so for this study, we did not have a traffic engineer as part of our team, and those were really something that was expressed by residents that we talked about that lived along Glade and in that area. I think if that's something that was to be explored, one, it would need to be a part of the redevelopment along North Avenue. Otherwise, I think the timing of it would probably be inappropriate. So I think as part of that redevelopment plan, that would be something that would need to be included as part of it, is the traffic study and analysis of if you are to cul-de-sac Glade, what that would look like, what that impact would have to other streets that are adjacent to it, knowing that once you cul-de-sac one street, you can be potentially pushing traffic down a little further to the east. So our intent would be, if you are to explore this redevelopment opportunity, that be a part of that traffic study.
Additional questions? Alderman Brennan.
Thank you. So with any development, two areas of concern always surface, traffic and pedestrian safety, of course. And all the plans seem to take that into consideration, although when I look at the York Street and Butterfield Road, plan, I do see bike lanes on Butterfield. And to me, I'm assuming that would have to be coordinated with IDOT, but also it just seems like it lends itself to a pretty big safety concern from my perspective.
Yes, you're talking about on the north side of Butterfield and the proposed roadway cross-section, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so I think the idea there too was you would have the space, it would be potentially appropriate just because of the scale, but really what we were hoping to do there is get a 6-foot shoulder, similar to what we had talked about along Lake Street. That would be sort of a transition zone for those that are making turns. But over time, I think as part of a feasibility study within the bike plan, if you are to reconfigure this road, when the bike plan was done, this road hadn't been considered to be reconfigured this way. I think it's something that would be feasible to explore in the future. There are roads that are of similar scale that I think, because of the roadway widths and the speeds at which cars are traveling and the adjacency to residential neighborhoods, there's validity in it. But I also think it's something that could be accommodated by some of the side streets, which is, I know, what a big part of the bike plan I talked about in the past is if you can't do it on a primary, see if you can do it on one of the tertiary streets that are running parallel to, if it's not Butterfield, it'd be York or Lake. But I still think it'd be something in the future worth exploring, especially if you're going to go the route of reconfiguring or updating this cross-section.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Alderman Levin.
The question I had, Nick, was about the Lake Street plan, and one of the comments that's in the report was making modifications to slow traffic down. We have so few streets that you can actually move on. Like if you're trying to go down York, good luck. I usually pack a lunch if I'm going at a certain hour of the day. So why is, because Lake Street is one of our primary arterial streets, why would a goal be to slow the traffic down as opposed to use that as a primary arterial street to get people east-west in a fairly expeditious way?
Yeah, that's a fair, it's not, the intent isn't to slow it down slower than the current speed limit permits it to be. It would be that people that are driving it actually follow the speed limit. Would be the intent of that, is to reduce those lane widths. I think a lot of what we had talked about with businesses in this area and some of the industrial businesses in the area is these roads don't feel, you wouldn't even feel safe to walk along them because cars are moving beyond the speed limit as it stands now. And those are things that we, as planners, we see, and it's very common in many of the communities. And small things like landscaping, particularly street trees in those areas, or where feasible, putting street trees in medians, and reducing the lane widths are a way of slowing down traffic, not to a halt, not as if it was in the downtown area or on some of the other, pedestrian or residential streets. It's really just it's a traffic measure to get cars to move at a more appropriate speed, but not reducing speed limits. I don't think that's what we were, if that's how it's reading, that wasn't the intent, so.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Alderman Dunn. I don't have specific questions, just a few comments. I'm very supportive of this plan. I think it's very exciting. Looking at this process commenced well over a year ago. It was highly, the public was highly engaged in visioning workshops, and the various commissions and committees that reviewed this, so I'm very pleased with the final product. All 5 areas have a lot of creative ideas to really jumpstart a more vibrant little sub area, is what they're called. Particularly the first 2 sub areas being in the 2nd Ward, the Lake Street and then the 83 North corridor. The Lake Street is a very clunky area. It's very hard, it's formidable to get from one parcel to another. So the proposal to create better flow and just a more friendly environment for those choosing to do business there or trying to be pedestrians in that area, and in the same way with the North and 83 corridor. My comment is that the final plan looks fantastic, and definitely are supportive of it.
No comments? Alderman Bram?
Thank you. A few comments. First being, I found it interesting for the Lake Street corridor that it's being looked at to see what we can do for additional pedestrian traffic along that corridor. As Alderman Levin already spoke to, it's one of the few streets within the city that does have a decent or higher volume of traffic as well as a higher rate of speed. I wouldn't look at that corridor to be something that we would necessarily go out of our way for pedestrian traffic. So if you can kind of touch on the rationale to take measures, or at least the plan being to take measures for increasing pedestrian traffic along that corridor.
Yeah, so having spoken with many of the property owners that are there now, and then also taking into consideration the type of uses that if these areas were to redevelop would benefit from those types of improvements, that's really where a lot of that came from. Not only the commercial developments that are on the south side, but industrial and office users that are to the north expressed several times that they would like to see more pedestrian connections for their employees to be able to walk to go get a bite to eat, or be able to walk to go to a service along Lake Street. It's not, and I can understand your point, it's not to say that this becomes the It wouldn't feel like a downtown. It's not that kind of carriage walk where it's a sidewalk attached to the road. There would be a buffer, a parkway that would distance yourself from the street. But it's just something that if you wanted to walk along the street, you should be able to. And I think if you go out there now, you can see a lot of what we call like cow paths, where people are walking through there. There are examples of people doing this now. It would be nice that if over time the city could really formalize that and put in a sidewalk that allows for safer connections. Also, when you put in a sidewalk, it does signal to investors and developers and just in general vehicles that are driving the area that there are pedestrians present and that this is an area that you could walk through. So it's just a couple of different things we're trying to accomplish. And we even talked about it could be appropriate to do these in phases. Maybe you do it on the south side where the residential district exists now, and people that live there might be able to take advantage of it. And over time, if it's something that's been either used or utilized the way that you were hoping it would, or if some of the businesses to the north continue to express the desire or the concern to have a sidewalk along Lake Street, that you could put that in over time as well. So that's really where that came from.
Thank you. The next question being 83 and North Avenue. I always forget if it's one of the top 3 dangerous intersections in Illinois, or I know it's up there from a vehicular perspective. The plan seems to want to develop it 2 out of the 4 corners. Is that also including any safety measures to improve that intersection? Because, that's not a title that we like to have, having one of the more dangerous intersections in Illinois. And would a development on those 2 corners help that or mitigate that traffic pattern, or actually be detrimental?
So I don't know if it's one of the top 3 unsafe. I'm not sure about that. It is one of the top 5 busiest intersections, at-grade intersections in Illinois, which I think is pretty, if it's not top 10, it's pretty substantial. So that might come inherently with there being some safety concerns or traffic conflicts. The developments that we recommend or that we show both on the northwest side and the southeast side, I do think would benefit from it. Again, not turning into this pedestrian dominant corridor, but something that could accommodate those types of users. People that do want to walk maybe from the east, be able to safely cross Route 83 to get to a use or a development on the west side or the east side. And same thing, depending on the types of commercial or rec center use that may ultimately end up on that northwest side, I think giving people the opportunity to walk should be something that should be considered. And I do think part of that improvement at the intersection would play a critical role in that, where people would feel like, one, I'm allowed to cross this. Right now, when you try, I went out there to take photos, and I can tell you I felt like I was breaking the law walking across those intersections, particularly North Avenue. North Avenue is actually the harder one to cross because there's no refuge, there's no break to get across those lanes, and I think that's not the message that you want to have. And for the amount of people that are driving through this area, I think an improvement in this intersection would go a long way to kind of enhancing overall what could go here. So.
Thank you. And yes, the few times that I have attempted to cross both in that area, I felt like I was part of the game Frogger trying
Right.
to
Yeah.
not get hit by a vehicle.
Yeah.
The last question is York and Butterfield. I guess if you can, or maybe the committee might be more appropriate, speak to what were the specific inputs from the residents who lived in this area, and what were the changes made to the plan to reflect those concerns?
I can address them. So from page 37, 38, and 39, I would say wholesale kind of addressing of some of their concerns, some of their comments was accommodated in the text. So basically all of these paragraphs have been, re-examined. We fold in some of the recommendations that we received from them, additional input that we received from the city. And I think kind of going back and forth with the working group, what the overall intent of this sub-area plan really did come out of that process. I think we received a lot of feedback. Some of the things in particular we're talking about, if these areas are redeveloped or are to redevelop, that it be consistent, that it's something that you sort of have to, there's a lot of process that would have to go along with it. So a traffic analysis, a transportation analysis, how would you coordinate that effort so it's not something that would happen individually? It would need to be a part of a larger effort. We did talk about some of the other things were annexation and what that approach or that process might look like. Right now that's not something the city is actively pursuing. They're not actively trying to annex that area, and I think that was something that kind of working with the community or working with the residents, we needed to make more clear. This plan needed to be more clear about it. What redevelopments would look like, what's the intent if it was to redevelop, what's appropriate if it's multifamily or if it's of a higher residential use, a higher residential density. We talked about that. And then just some of the traffic management. I think the previous draft wasn't clear enough when we said, that traffic through this area should be allowed to move through a little bit easier. And I think the intent there was, if it were to redevelop, connections should be made that would make it easier to either get to the hospital, to get to some of the other uses. But that is not something that should be done prior to any redevelopment occurring. So just some of the issues like that were some that came out of working with the residents and working with the city and working with Alderman Honquist.
So it wasn't necessarily change of what would be recommended as part of this plan for the use of this area. It sounds more from a procedural and clarification.
I would say it's more about procedural and clarification. I do think some of the uses, I think when we talked about the uses that might be appropriate, I think the manner in which those uses would get to this area, that's what we were trying to clarify.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Davis? Thank you for your time and your work for the city.
Actually,
you had
Mayor,
one.
sorry. Sorry, one last question. It's a
Alderman
quick one.
Brennan.
Yes, thank you. So I noticed under the southwest corner of York and Butterfield, there was a mention of hospital parking. Has the hospital been actively engaged in this process?
So we had reached out to the hospital. We had spoken to them earlier on in the process. In terms of what their specific plans are for these areas, no, we don't know exactly what they plan on doing. Part of that was just with seeing how much surface lot they have there and knowing what other hospitals have done in other regions, we thought it was appropriate to at least give an idea of what could go there in the future.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Davis? Mr. Davis, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Alderman Honquist.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for walking us through that. So, and just a couple of comments. On Sub-Area 5, some of the original readings were more ambiguous to annexation. There was actually a little bit of, as interpreted, that we were actually interested in annexation, and when annexation occurred, then certain things should happen. We spent some time just working with the neighborhood there to soften some of that language, because it was not the intent to have a plan for annexation or a specific plan for development, but put a plan in place with some options. So some of the folks were worried about how that would be interpreted to their home values, that the city's planning to go in and move in and potentially buy up some land or support a development there and not have it, comprehensive in nature. So we walked through some of that and updated that, and then the rest of the plan speaks for itself. So I'd just like to thank Housel Levine. They put a lot of work into this. I think they did a really nice job. Staff, particularly DPC staff, put a lot of time in this. So I wanted to thank them and ask your support.
Additional comments or questions? Alderman Toledo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo Alderman Honquist in thanking both our consultant, Housel Levine, for all your time, as well as city staff and the development zoning and planning department of the city. And I also want to thank the commission. The commission was, the zoning and planning commission was an integral part of this process as well. And all of the folks in the public that participated in the process throughout the year and a half that we took public comment and engaged with the public to make these plans the best plans that they could be. I do think that these are really good plans, and thank you, Alderman Dunn, for your comments as well. I think that these set a nice vision for these sub-areas for the city, but I do want everyone to understand, as I learned through this process, that these are not hard written in stone. These are meant to signal a vision of what planners and us up here in the city council think is appropriate for these areas. Does that mean that we're gonna get exactly what's pictured in these pictures? Not necessarily, maybe so. The devil will be in the details, or the details will come through if and when a particular development gets proposed for one of these areas or in multiple areas. So I think it was important for me to help everyone understand, as I learned, is that this is a vision, a planning document, not prescriptive of what will come to pass. And then a couple of folks mentioned some questions to Mr. Davis. I wanted to expand specifically on the North Avenue and Route 83 intersection. I think I literally wrote the word yikes on the original draft that I reviewed when I saw the pedestrian crosswalks on North and 83. You know, we spoke at some length about that intersection and whether it's even appropriate to have pedestrian crossing there. And I think the takeaway that I had and that I wanted to share with all of you is that I don't think that this is ever going to be a highly pedestrian-used intersection. But when and if folks do want to try to cross these, with this plan, it proposes a more safe way for them to do so, so that they don't feel like they're in the game of Frogger, as Alderman Brand mentioned. And also related to improving the safety of the intersection, specifically for vehicular traffic, one of the recommendations in this sub-area was to move the driveways and curb cuts away from the intersection as compared to how some of them are now. That theoretically would help reduce some of the conflicts because you won't have folks crossing the intersection and trying to make turns to access stores or retail or restaurants. Moving them away from the intersection should help improve that safety as well. So with that, I ask for everyone's support and thank you.
Additional comments? Clerk Cyprian.
Levin,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Conquest,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Mulliner,
Aye.
Brennan,
Aye.
Sabatino.
Aye.
Deuter,
Aye.
Dunn,
Aye.
Leader,
Aye.
Palumski,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Saludo,
Aye.
York. 14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays, motion carries. Agenda item 8.2 is approved. On to reports and recommendations of appointed and elected officials. Mayor Morley, that's me. I will try to be quick because first item on my report is after this meeting, we have another meeting. Committee of the Whole, we are wrapping up budget conversations. We have our circle back items tonight. For those of you in the audience who don't know, we have a very large comprehensive budget that's about 4,000 line items, and as we go through it, if there any elected officials want additional information or want to have additional discussion, we put it on our circle back list. So if you're interested, stay tuned. Immediately following this meeting, we have our Committee of the Whole in which those circle backs will be discussed. It's state law that we approve our budget put forth and approve a budget every year. The hope, if all goes well, is that we will approve a budget 2 weeks from tonight. Second, it's good to see so many civic-minded students in the audience. I see some students from not only York High School, but Elmhurst College, who I had an opportunity to meet with earlier this year. Good to see them in the audience. And last but not least, and Fenwick?
I think so.
Yeah, Fenwick, yeah.
If you raise your hand if you're, oh, see, there you go. Wow. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, last but not least, Ralph Pachanio. I want to give Ralph Pachanio a shout out. Am I saying it right, John? Okay. Most of you might know who Ralph is, but if you don't, he, among other things, is the chairman of our Veterans Commission. And out of the approximately 600,000 veterans in the state of Illinois, Ralph was chosen to be one of 200 Illinois bicentennial honorees. The honorees were nominated and evaluated on their achievements and the contributions made by each honoree that have aided, benefited, and provided inspiration to local communities as well as our fellow veterans. We wish we could be with Ralph tonight. The official recognition is tonight, so I at least wanted to give him a shout out. I know he's downtown Chicago receiving this award, and what makes it a little sweeter is that it was a surprise to Ralph. He was nominated without his knowledge, so it's nice to let him know that. That's it for me. City Manager.
Thank you. Three quick items. This week is the second of the free leaf pickups. We've been working with Republic as to whether we should keep it or move it, but it was determined to keep it this week, so that'll be with the regular garbage pickup. Second, even though street sweeping has been concluded for the year, we were able to talk, we worked with the street sweeping company, and we will have them out in force tomorrow to try to get those remaining leaves that have fallen. With the snow that came, it's an interesting scenario where a lot of those were plowed up onto the parkway, so we're going to try to get as many of those up as possible so that any rain and melting gets into the sewers. And then the last item is a follow-up to some presentation that we had done earlier on the water meter project. Paul Burris has had an opportunity to make a couple presentations at some ward meetings on water meters, and particularly the Water Smart program. So we're going to bring him in after the first of the year to City Council meeting to do that presentation. Obviously, because the cameras are on, everybody at home will get to see that, but the council will have a better idea as well. We couldn't get him on the schedule before the end of the year, so we're going to move that to January. We've met with a few more residents who have had questions, significant questions about their utility bills. Again, you may have read about those on social media. Tom Trezina and Lori Hayes met with a number of those residents, and I think helped explain better what the situation is. So if you have questions before that, please, by all means, contact us. Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Any other reports? Alderman Honquist.
Actually, it's other business. I'll wait, sorry.
Okay. Any other reports? Seeing none, we'll go on to resolutions. Agenda item 10. We are pulling this specific item from the agenda as paperwork is not completed on it. So it'll be on a future agenda. Any other business? Alderman Honquist.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make a public comment tonight, and I think you'll join me in this. There will be a raffle being held for Matt Toole. For those of you that don't know him, he is been a survivor of ALS for 9 years now here in Elmhurst. Many folks do know him, and there'll be raffle tickets being sold. I am one captain selling them. I think we have another up here. It's going to be two. You want to buy from me, make him work harder. So there'll be $25 a piece, and the winner will receive a bowl suite for a game, $500 worth of food and beverage, and I think the drawing will be held late January to HB Jones. I'm looking for the exact date. I think it's the 31st. I don't know if you know, Mike, but yeah,
It's
Thursday,
late
January 31st, and then the picture and the event will be February 23rd. So if you're interested, please talk to one of us and we'll sell you a ticket. Thank you.
Any other business? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Alderman Kennedy, second by Alderman Deuter. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
How many minutes?
Much more.